I would like to start by actually introducing myself and my family to you. First and foremost, let me pull this thing out and see if I can. Here we go. All right. The topic tonight is avoiding leadership failure, and I hope that it will bless you. I hope it won't depress you. I hope it will actually prevent leadership failure in your life. I'm going to be speaking out of experience, personal and otherwise. So I pray, along with what Tony prayed, Lord, just bless us and teach us. You are the great teacher. You know each of our hearts, and you know exactly what we need to hear tonight. So I pray, Father, that you would be with the words that are spoken, give us ears to hear, eyes to see, and change us from the inside out. In Jesus' name, amen. I'd like to start out by talking about my family, and I have two children, Con and Kaya, who have developed some, and my son, go figure, is an attorney. Oh, I see. I got to get used to this thing. What I'm seeing up there is the next slide, right? Okay, so here we go. They've developed. My son is an attorney. My daughter is an artist. Well, I am an attorney and a counselor, and my wife is an artist. Go figure. I wanted to show you this picture of my son because I wanted you to see what I would look like if I took my shirt off. But actually, one of the lessons of leadership failure is don't lie to your audience. I confess. My wife, how many of you have heard of or seen Clean Sheets? Yeah? Great. So she has a one-woman performance. She is also an artist. She does painting, and she has a one-woman performance where she talks about her faith journey, some of it tragic, some of it, all of it miraculous. And I hope someday maybe you'll get a chance to see that as well. But it really is an honor. Oh, let me not forget my dog, Quinn, who is a comfort dog, a therapist dog, and just great all around. I also want to introduce a colleague, Laura Nagy, is with us tonight, and she is a counselor at our Serving Leaders Ministries. Let me just share a little bit with you what Serving Leaders Ministry is. You have some pamphlets on your table, and Serving Leaders Ministries is a ministry that was created 16 years ago. It's hard for me to believe I'm saying 16 years. It feels like 6 days. But it was created to come alongside ministry leaders for the purposes of providing a very sacred and safe place for them to get help. Because ministry leaders and pastors and missionaries are human, and we all suffer the same things that everybody else does, right? But we want to provide a safe place for them to deal with their problems, because everybody knows when a ministry leader falls, it really affects so many people, right? The family, the person, the family, the church, the community at large. And so that's what we do. We have about 25 counselors on staff. We have 2 offices locally in Westchester and in Willow Grove, and then we have an office also in Columbus, Ohio, where our two of our member care specialists work with missionaries all over the world. So there's more information that you can look up there as we go. But let me ask this question. As we talk about ministry failure or leadership failure, I want you to stand up if you know of a pastor or ministry leader who is oblivious to his or her own negative impact that he or she has had on others. Don't be shy. Okay, now Laura's standing, and I'm hoping it's not about me. Okay. Stand up if you, and stay standing. If you have experienced a lack of trust in a pastor or ministry leader in your life. Okay. Stand up if you've experienced or known a pastor or ministry leader who has burned out, just been so exhausted that he can't function any longer. All right. Last but not least, stand up if you know of a pastor or ministry leader who has been forced to resign or leave due to relational conflict or immorality. So look around the room. Those of you who are still seated are blessed, and I'm glad that you have not experienced any of these, but the majority here have experienced this kind of thing. All right, you can have a seat. So at Serving Leaders, we do spend a lot of time providing counseling to ministry leaders who are in strategic positions to influence the body of Christ in profound and eternal ways. Many, though, have failed to protect their hearts and fallen in their ability to lead, to minister, and have influence with other people. Now, sometimes it's the big public sin that we all read about, and sometimes it's really the little private sins that no one sees, but sins of the heart, of inner motivation, and that undermines the ability to lead. So tonight I'm going to focus on 3 ways to protect your heart. All of you are either leaders or going to be leaders. You're here because you have aspirations to, or you are leading. And so 3 ways to protect your heart. And these 3 ways that I want to talk about have helped me immensely, not only in my professional career as an attorney and as a ministry leader and as a counselor, but in my personal life, in my marriage, with my kids, with my friends. And it's summarized in 3 ways, 3 words: motivation, impact, and feedback. Those are the things that we are going to be examining tonight. Motivation, impact, and feedback. More specifically, 3 ways to avoid leadership failure as you serve in the calling that God has called you. 1, cultivate a deep understanding of the motives of your heart. And by the way, we'll spend most of our time in that topic. 2, develop an acute awareness of the impact that you have on other people. And 3, understand your own weaknesses and develop personal vulnerability and receptivity to feedback. It's a lot of words, but these are important concepts that I really want to drill down on, because if you follow these things, you will do well. Now, when I think about 3 areas, these 3 areas of protecting your heart, the words of the Apostle Paul come to me from Timothy 4:16, where Paul admonished Timothy and challenged him to take heed to yourself. Okay? Take heed to yourself. Paul understood that there were challenges to ministry, and incredible pressures that had the potential to cause leadership failure in Timothy, to disqualify Timothy in ministry. He was a young pastor, and he faced the same kind of difficult pressures that most ministry leaders today face. For example, demands on time and energy, people being critical of him and slandering and gossiping in the church, giving in to popular or secular cultural standards, the requirement to be ready in season and out of season, regardless of whether you are ready or not, or feeling exhausted. Remaining a man of character. So Paul said to him, Timothy, take heed to yourself and the doctrine. This can be translated by the ESV. Keep a close watch on yourself. Another translation says, pay close attention to yourself. And so the passage of Scripture here says, let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity. Till I come, give attention to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. Important, so important, right? Don't neglect the gift that is within you, which was given to you. It goes on to say, meditate on these things, give yourself entirely to them, that your progress may be evident to all. And then it says, take heed to yourself and to the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you. Now, admittedly, most Christian leaders pay real close attention to doctrine. Some of us are biblical encyclopedias, right? We have lots of theological knowledge. But sadly, in contrast, we've ignored ourselves and our own hearts and what's going on in our own hearts to our peril. And you don't have to look very far to see failure in leadership of those who failed to take heed to themselves. So, for example, I've got a photograph up here of many, many people who have failed in leadership, from presidents to governors to generals to pastors and others, who've worked their entire lives to be in the positions they've achieved and yet failed. Why did they fail? What happened to them? Is it sheer stupidity? Is it lack of intelligence to engage in, for example, sexual impropriety or financial impropriety? Or is something else going on? So, for example, why would a pastor engage in sexual misconduct? Why would church superiors cover over sexual abuse in a church or an institution and transfer known pedophiles to another area or another church or another school? Why would a CEO reserve for himself 9 parking spots and have a private elevator to his office and believe that the impact of that decision would not affect adversely his ability to inspire confidence? Right? These are questions that we need to think about. Why? And here's the answer. They failed to protect their heart. They failed to understand the deep longings in their heart. You see, it's very easy in ministry to get caught up in activity and really ignore or be blind to our own personal internal heart and character issues that really do have the potential to sabotage our lives, to sabotage our relationships, to sabotage our ministries. Here's a quote: "Character is the essential stuff a person is made of, the inner reality and quality in which thoughts, speech, decisions, behavior, and relations are rooted. As such, character determines behavior, just as behavior determines character." That's Os Guinness. So here's what I want to do. I want to walk you through these 3 points, and we'll start first with this idea of avoiding leadership by cultivating a deep and sophisticated understanding of the motives of your own heart. And I personally, experientially, have come to believe that understanding the motives of your heart is one of the most important things that you can do as a believer and as a leader. And if you don't understand your motives, you will never be able to have an intimate relationship with God or an intimate relationship with others. And you'll never enjoy the fullness that God has for you in his relationship with you. And as an attorney and as a counselor, I've seen over and over again, this matters. It really matters. Because I've seen people destroy their lives, relationships, and ministries by not understanding why they do what they do. What's going on inside their hearts. So let's just start with this question. What is motive? What is motive? When we talk about motive, what are we talking about? Say it again? The reason for doing something. Why we do what we do. Motive defined really is that, the driving force behind an action, the reason for doing something, why we do what we do. And this can be in big areas and in small areas. We all have motives of why we do what we do. As human beings, we image God. God has a reason for everything he does. There's never anything random in God's world and in God's intentions. And we image him, and so we also are given this ability to have motives, why we do what we do, even at an early age. Now, let me just illustrate this. When my son, the big guy up there, when he was 1, I remember one morning, I woke up really early. He was sleeping in our bed, and he woke up at like 5. And you know, when any of you kids have kids who wake you up at that time, and you know what it feels like, right? All right, so my son Con says to me, he looks at a bookcase across from the bed, and he points to a stuffed animal there, and he says, "Bear." And I open my eye, I'm like, "No. Bear." I'm like, "No, Con, it's too early. It's too early." And then he says, "Book," next to the bear, a book. Why did he do that? Because he knows that I'm more likely, oh, you want to read? Oh, okay. So he says, "Book." And I go, okay. And as I reach for the book, he says, "Bear." At 1. He's thinking, and he had a motive in his heart for what he was doing. Now, the answer to that, by the way, is my wife and I deceived our children to believe that we could read their foreheads when they lied. And so what we would do is when they'd start to tell a lie, we'd say, are you telling the truth? They would take their head, they'd go, look, see? In any event, the scriptures make clear that God places a premium on the purity of our motivations. And he sees our motives, and this is where character and integrity intersect. Motive is where your character and your integrity intersect. Now look at these scriptures for a moment. I don't know if you can read these, but let me just read a couple from 1 Samuel. The Lord said to Samuel, this is when he's looking to see who's going to be king, who's going to be chosen as king, and he's looking at David's brothers. He says, don't look at appearance or the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. For God sees not as a man sees, for a man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. In Hebrews, and I'm sure you're familiar with the passage, for the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Able to judge the thoughts and intention of the heart. There's no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. And you see, God can see obviously our outward appearance and our outward actions, but he also understands and knows our hearts. And in fact, the problem with the Pharisees was that their hearts were far from Jesus and from God, right? He says, these people draw near to me with their mouth, but their hearts are far from me. So it's possible to externally conform to standards that look good on the outside, but still have a heart that's far from God. And that is the problem that Jesus identified in the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day. They were supposed to be honest, transparent, truth bearers, called to love God and others, and calling others to love God. But the very thing that they were called to be eluded them because they did not understand the importance of motives of the heart. And it was deadly to their souls. It was deadly to their relationship with God. See, God created us in his image as volitional beings who move and make choices and move in a direction. And our choices are not random. How many of you could tell me why you're sitting in the seat you're sitting at tonight? Like, that was not random, was it? Did you know why you sat? Why did you sit back there, and why did you sit up here? You all have motives. You sat next to the door because you thought, if this guy's boring, I'm out of here, right? There's motive. And the point is, we may be aware of why we do what we do, or we may not. How many are aware of why you sat where you sat? How many are aware of why did you say hello to somebody and not say hello to somebody else? Okay, there's a few honest people in here. You see, even the idea of motive has been incorporated in our jurisprudence, right? When you commit a crime, if you have intent behind it, if you meant to do it, that's one crime. But if you didn't have intent, it may not be a crime. If I pick up your cell phone by accident, it's not a crime. If I intend to pick up your cell phone and take it, that's theft, right? Same thing with murder, premeditation and murder. So you see, we have a jurisprudence that's based on motive, and God never has to wonder about why we do what we do. He sees the motives behind what we do. Psalm 51 says, before a word is even on my lips, you know it altogether. And he places a premium on motives of the heart. Now, you with me so far? All right. Yes or no? Yes. Okay. All right. So the question then is, are you in touch with why you do what you do? Big decisions and little decisions. Have you ever asked an adolescent, why did you do that? And what kind of answer do you get? Have you ever asked yourself, why did you do that? And got the same response? Right? How many have had that experience? Why is that? Sometimes we're oblivious to what's going on. Now, where I want to go with this is very practical, but it's going to get a little heady for a moment, okay? But I want you to bear with me, right? Slap the other person next to you and say, stay with him. Don't do that. That would be assault and battery. You don't want to do that. Okay. Here's the statement, and we're going to unpack this statement. So just follow with me. And this is in your notes. By the way, for those of you who have not discovered it, you do have an outline here. There are fill-in-the-blanks. I got that from Scott's style last time I was here. Thank you, Scott. All right. 2 practical dangers of not knowing your motives. And by the way, what I'm going to share with you is life-changing. It's been life-changing for me, and I've seen it be life-changing for many people. All right. So here's the first principle. The degree to which you're not in touch with your longings and the motivations of your heart is the degree to which you'll be subject to desires that feel more like compulsions over which you have no control and have the potential to cause leadership failure. I'm going to say it again. The degree to which you're not in touch with the longings of your heart and the motivations of your heart is the degree to which you will be subject to desires which will feel more like compulsions over which you have no control. Just on second reading, does it make sense to you? How many say that makes sense? And how many say, you got to unpack that more? Okay, we'll just skip that next part. You all got it? Let's explain it a little bit more in detail. And I like to use a metaphor of an iceberg to unpack this concept, okay? And I want you to think about the iceberg as your life, and above the waterline is what you are aware of, okay? Aware and what other people see, that's behavior. That's above the waterline. And let underneath the waterline represent what you're not aware of and what is unseen, right? So I can be up here, and you may not be aware, you will not be aware of some motive in my heart or some desire in my heart which I don't share with you, obviously. But you see me up here. That's what's visible. Now, question for you. In the Christian culture, in the church, where do we tend to place most emphasis? Above the waterline or below the waterline? Above. So we look at outward appearance. We look at how people behave, what they tell us, what they claim, and we're often very impressed by that. But we don't see under the waterline. And sadly, many of us don't see what's under our own waterline. By definition, we're not conscious of something going on underneath. So that's the metaphor that I want to work with you on. And so in the Christian world, we often ignore what's on the inside and concentrate on what's on the outside. And particularly in ministry, ministry has a lot riding on what you look like and what you do on the outside, right? If I came up here and could not speak at all and was like crawling in a corner, that's an external thing that you would see, and it wouldn't go well with me. So we all have to have some kind of outward appearance. But the question is, what's just as important, if not more, is inside, what's going on inside, and why I do what I do, what my motives are, hearkening back to those passages of Scripture I just read. So now, if I admit to you stuff that's going on the inside which you can't see, but maybe I'm in pain, maybe I'm struggling with something, maybe I have an issue with something, the problem is I won't be admired, or I fear I won't be admired or respected in the way that I want to be. And it becomes very tempting to allow others to not really know what's going on inside, but to present outwardly something different, because I want to impress you. How many like to impress other people? Now, in the Christian world, there's a lot of opportunity to deceive other people. We can deceive our spouses. We can deceive our children. We can deceive our friends. We can deceive our church, because nobody knows what's going on internally. They just see what's on the outside. Okay? So we want to address that, because what does God place a value on? What is His premium on? Right? Issues of the heart. Not just our outward behavior, but what's going on inside. Because you can look like whitewashed tombs on the outside, but be full of what? You know the passage. Dead men's bones. That's what Jesus likened the Pharisees to. So outwardly, above the waterline, underneath is what we're unconscious of. Now, let's talk about what's going on in terms of motives and longings. When we talk about motives, we're talking about intent of the heart, why I do what I do. And when we talk about longings, we're talking about what I desire, what I want. Okay? Now, I have this under the waterline here because sometimes we're not conscious of why we do what we do and what we want. Obviously, motives and longings can be above the waterline. I can be conscious of what I want. You know, some of you want to, I don't know, get a degree. Some of you want to get married. Some of you long to teach Scripture. Those are conscious things. You have motives for that and longings. But there are things that are hidden from us. And so I want to come back to this principle now that says, let me just walk through this piece here. Let's talk about the longings in our hearts. We're created by God with longings. Naturally, it's hardwired in us. For example, we are created with longings for relationship. And we're created to love. To love God, what's the commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, right? Soul, mind, body. And love your neighbor as yourself, right? There's hardwired into relationship. We long for relationship. We also long to have love and intimacy. We long for validation and affirmation. How many of you love to be affirmed? How many of you love to be adored? Huh? I love it. I want to be adored. I want to be loved, right? We're also created with longings to be creative and to have impact in our world, to impress people in a positive sense. And we're also created for longings for comfort and for safety. These are some of the longings that we are made and hardwired with, and we image God as we have these longings. Now, coming back though to this concept, the degree to which you're not in touch with those longings is the degree to which behavior will feel compulsive if you're not in touch with what's going on inside. In other words, say it a different way, behavior in pursuit of an unrecognized goal or longing will not feel like a choice. Now, this is straight out of a book by Larry Crabb, who is a Christian psychologist who wrote this many years ago. So behavior in pursuit of an unrecognized goal will not feel like a choice, but will feel compulsive. Conversely, behavior will feel like a choice when goals are recognized. Addictions, compulsions, moral failures are directly related to longings and motivations of which we are not aware. That's the key point here, and I'm going to unpack that and explain that with an example. Addictions, compulsions, and moral failures are directly related to longings and motivations of which we are not aware. Okay? And leadership failure results from not knowing our motives and what we long for. So let me give you an example of this as we talk about this here. So I talked to you about this idea of motives and longings. Okay, so about 20 plus years ago, I had the opportunity to counsel a woman who came into for counseling, and her presenting problem was this. She said, "I'm a sex addict." And I said, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" Now, this is a 55-year-old woman who was what you would consider, stereotypically would say she's a church lady. She's been in church. She knows her Bible. She does not present as a person who might describe herself as that at all. So I was a little bit taken aback, and I said, "So what do you mean by that? You're a sex addict?" And she said, "Well, every other week or so, I find myself in bed with a stranger. I go out, I party a little bit, pick somebody up, and I find myself in bed with a stranger." How many are going to hit her in the head with the Bible immediately? I had the good sense not to. And so I just listened to her. And at some point in this session, I said to her, "What do you want?" And so she described herself, "I'm single, I'm lonely, and I really, really, really want to have a man in my life. I can stay home, we can sit by the fire, we can watch movies, we can have a life, we can do things together. That's really what I want." And I said, "That's interesting. So when you go out and find some stranger and bring him home and sleep with him, do you feel satisfied? And she goes, no, not at all. It's disgusting. And I thought, now that's fascinating. Because what you're longing for is love and acceptance and relationship and intimacy. But behaviorally, what you're doing is the opposite, right? Good catch. All right, now, I didn't do more than that. Over the next few weeks, she came back, and as we talked about how she's doing, interestingly, what she said was, I just want you to know that I've stopped going out and engaging in this behavior. I'm like, really? Why? And as we talked about it, what happened was she got in touch with what she was longing for. The behavior that felt compulsive no longer felt compulsive because she started to identify what she's really longing for. She wasn't longing for sex with a stranger. She was longing for intimacy, but she wasn't in touch with that. And she was engaging in behavior that in her twisted mind, in our sinful minds, we always think we'll do something that will give us life, which doesn't give us life. Does that make sense to you? So what I thought was amazing was the fact that the compulsive behavior stopped, almost cold turkey, when she discovered what was going on under the waterline and what she was longing for and why she was doing it. Behavior in pursuit of an unrecognized goal will feel compulsive. Conversely, when you have a recognized goal, it won't feel so compulsive. So the point here is that as we uncover our motives and our longings, it restores volition. I'm going to ask another personal question. How many of you ever find yourself engaging in behavior that doesn't feel like a choice? It feels a little compulsive. It's like, I don't know why I'm doing it, but I'm doing it. If you can start to explore and ask yourself, what am I really longing for right now? That will help you, because you have legitimate longings that get twisted into illegitimate behavior and then lead us astray. And I can give a number of examples of other ministry leaders who have engaged in the same kind of behavior, but once they start to understand what they're longing for, it starts to resolve. And I'm not saying it's a magic thing, but it does start to take the compulsion away. So you see, sexual immorality is rarely about sex itself. Porn is rarely about sex itself, but some other longing that gets twisted. And that's one of the reasons why ministry leaders and presidents and senators have engaged in moral failures, because they don't understand and pay careful attention to what's going on in their heart. You know, if you look at the statistics, 30 to 40% of godly pastors admit to using porn. Why? What are they longing for? They're longing for something, and I guarantee you it's not pixels on a page. It's something else. And the degree to which we get in touch with that is the degree to which we will not be subject to this compulsive behavior. So what you want to do is start to ask yourself, what's going on in my heart? And is what I'm looking for, what I'm doing a substitute for something else? Now, it doesn't have to be insidious stuff like porn and sex. How many of you ever eat when you're not hungry? Right? I walk in the door, and I go to the refrigerator, and I open the door, and I look in there, and I could have just come from a restaurant. Why? What is going on? Because there's something else that I'm longing for, some kind of satisfaction, some kind of comfort. I don't know. I should know because I'm teaching this stuff, but I don't. But what's going on inside? You see, and if you can stop and pause and say, okay, hold on, what do I really want? What am I really longing for? You can start to get in touch with that. And it's not just about these things that we're talking about. Let me just give you a couple of other examples of how sinful conduct can arise from legitimate longings. That's another key concept here. We have legitimate longings that get twisted, and then we try to get it through illegitimate or sinful ways. So, for example, slander, When someone slanders somebody's reputation, the longing might be for deep affirmation that gets twisted. There's nothing wrong with longing for affirmation, but it gets twisted into slander because I'm trying to put somebody else down to feel better about myself. Adultery, longing for relief from pain in a marriage that's become lifeless. Well, there's nothing wrong with longing for a life marriage, a good marriage, right? But the way we go about doing that. So you see, you can take any kind of longing and it gets twisted. In fact, it's interesting, in Jeremiah it says, my people have committed two great sins. First, they've forsaken me, the fountain of living waters. Think about God as a fountain of living waters. And they've hewn for themselves or dug for themselves cisterns or wells that can hold no water. That's the sinful human heart, right? We ignore God and we go to something else that can't hold any water, any life. And I think that's sort of the narrative for most of us. And when we come to the end of ourselves, we go, you know what? This didn't work, that didn't work, this didn't work. Jesus, you work. Jesus is life and life eternal, and we go to him. So, to make this very practical, what do you want to do when you're struggling with longings? Most of us are disappointed in some area of life. We're not getting what we're longing for. Well, number one, what you have to do is you have to know that, right? If you don't know that, you're going to be trying for something else and not even knowing why, and that'll feel compulsive. So you have to develop awareness of what you're longing for and what your motives are. And then my suggestion would be to invite Christ into your longings. But you have to feel it first. And that's a little bit of a dilemma, because if you feel the disappointment that you feel, that doesn't feel so good. And we're told you need to feel good. We're told, if you have Jesus, you're going to have peace. If you have Jesus, you're going to have power. Well, hang on. It's true, but you have to first admit the condition. And so inviting Christ into the place of longing and disappointment and pain and hurt is the first step. There's no shame there. He loves us, and nothing we've done or desired can turn him away from us. There's no sin so deep that Jesus won't touch us and change us. And when we go to him, he's either going to satisfy us in a way that is powerful and miraculous and great, or not. Let me see. We can satisfy our longings in a legitimate way. And if he doesn't come in, how many of you experience peace when God comes in miraculously and like you're at the end of your rope, or you're dealing with something and God, like, man, he comes in and it's powerful. How many of you experience that? Okay. I have. But it doesn't happen all the time. So what do we do when it doesn't happen? What we do then is we trust God. We do the right thing and continue to obey him and walk with him, even in the pain and disappointment. And what happens is, over time, he transforms us, transforms our heart in a way that we didn't see coming. Okay? So either he's going to satisfy our longings in a way that's beautiful and deep, or in a way that is not going to feel beautiful, but he's going to change us from the inside out. Now, I'd really like to, I don't know if you do this here, but can I just pause for a moment, and ask if you have questions about this topic before we move on? Am I allowed to do that, Tony? Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Transformation of the heart, to me, feels like a very Christianese statement.
Yes.
I've heard a lot of he will just take away the longing. Well, what does, and I know that's obviously not something that, because you just said we are planted with them. So what does that actually, transformation of the heart, you no longer desire that? What is that exactly?
That's a great question. So I'm not saying to kill your longings, because that's a mistake. No, transformation of the heart says, basically, Lord, I'm going to walk in you and I'm going to obey you in all things, even when it's hurt, I hurt and painful, and I'm disappointed and don't get what I really long for. And so sometimes we live with that disappointment for the rest of our lives. Sorry to break it to you, but that's the truth. and sometimes not. And sometimes he changes us. So for example, let's just say, you're a single person and you long to be married. You have no control over getting married. You want to get married. So that's a deep longing that is legitimate. And so what do you do with that when the right guy or gal has not come along, right? You walk with Christ and you trust him that he is effectuating his purpose in your heart and life and doing something in your heart that is transformative. It changes our character. Similarly, you're in a bad marriage and you can't get your spouse to even regard you in some way that you long to be regarded. Hey, that's real. So what do we do with that? We don't split. We stay there and say, God, what are you teaching me? What do you have for me? And I could probably give you 10 stories in my own life of deep disappointment, things I can't change, but as I look back, God has moved in my heart in ways that have changed me. So thank you for the question. Great question. Anybody else? One other. I don't charge by the question. Yeah.
My idea is very similar. What happens when you feel like you're very clear on, the longing, but it's not the time?
You know the longing, but it's not the time for it to be satisfied?
Yeah, so you're aware of the longing, you believe the longing, you trust the longing.
Yeah.
Every time you say, God, I just need to make sure you want this to happen, because I want it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's going to happen. Just keep waiting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's where you decide to do those things you talked about. So it's almost like you have an awareness of the longing. You have the why, you have the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not patient enough
Yeah.
to get there.
Yeah.
So you live in those places of unhealth because, well,
What do you do in the meantime?
what do you do in the meantime? Yeah.
What do you do in the meantime? I don't know we have much of a choice, right? We try to manipulate God, right? That's what we try to do. We bargain, I think what we have to do is be patient and trust as hard as it is. It's very difficult, right? But if you think of biblical examples like Joseph, think about Joseph for a moment. He's thrown in jail. He goes through all kinds of horrendous things. And what is he longing for? He's longing for freedom. He's longing for being reunited with his family, his father, things like that. And it didn't happen overnight. God promises Abraham, you're going to have a son. You're going to be the father of a multitude. It didn't happen overnight. It happened years, sometimes decades later. What was that?
Hundreds of years.
Yeah, exactly. So we do have to be patient. But I recognize how hard it is. And this thing keeps slipping down. Okay. All right, so you know what I want to do? I want to turn you over to the first hypothetical. I'm going to hold off on that second point that I have there. I said there's two truths. One is about compulsion. The other is about, let me just tell you the degree to which, let's see. So you can fill in your notes here. Wait, did I skip something here? Yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. The second point here, I don't want to develop it now. If we have time afterward and you ask me about it, we can come back to it. But I want to make sure we get the other stuff in here. The second point about not knowing your own motivations of your heart is the degree to which you're not in touch with the motivations of your heart is the degree to which you're dangerous. Because your relationships will be impacted negatively because you'll be manipulative. So let me just, 2 sentences on that. If I'm not aware of what I want in my heart or my motives, and I'm in a position of leadership, I will tend to manipulate people according to unconscious motivations. And if I don't know what's going on internally, I will end up manipulating you. So I'll just give you a quick example. As a counselor, suppose my longing is to be affirmed and validated in my quality of my counseling. Now, if I recognize that, I can handle that. If I don't recognize that, what will I do? I'll manipulate my client to affirm me. And then I'll be serving myself and not my client. That's a short way of saying it. So we want to be careful about if we don't know our motives, we don't know what's going on in our hearts, we can become manipulative with other people. All right? So that's all I'm going to say about that because for the sake of time. But what I'd like to do now, Tony, if you would be good enough to read our first example. And I'm going to set you free for maybe 10 minutes or so to have a conversation at your table with the questions that are below this first example. So, Tony, thank you. You just read it for us, and then we'll set you free to have a conversation about this.
All right. So, hypothetical number 1. Pastor James, the counselor pastor. James is the lead pastor of a new church plant, loves doing pastoral counseling, and provides consistent shepherding to his church. Up until recently, his staff has had a lot of respect for his counseling skills. However, there are reliable reports that he has crossed boundaries and engaged in questionable, unethical practices. He is asked about the personal finances of congregants, including how much they tithe. He has required officer candidates to share credit card statements to make sure that they are not on inappropriate sites. He has asked them to disclose the frequency of their sexual relationships with their spouses. James claims that he is responsible for their souls, and he will give an account to God for the spiritual welfare of his flock. Some who have left the church claim James has threatened to disclose the personal information learned through his pastoral counseling to make sure that they don't spread any discontentment among other members. He also has had negative impact on many of the married couples he has counseled. 2 of the wives he counseled have reported that he has insisted that they need to submit to their husbands even when they would endanger their physical and emotional welfare. You've heard him breach confidences by sharing prayer requests that include details of the personal problems of his counselees. He has used information learned in counseling in thinly veiled sermon illustrations. When you and the others have provided feedback, he looks puzzled and has a hard time understanding why people are upset with him. He explains that he has only tried to help those under his care in accordance with biblical principles. When counselees complained about his counseling practices to elders, he accused them of gossiping and failing to follow Matthew 18. You have personal knowledge that he has engaged in the above conduct, but he has blatantly lied about it in other settings. When confronted, he flatly denies it. Is that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
That's great. So, you're not going to have time to answer all of these questions, but pick one of the 2 of these questions that sort of float your boat there and you want to examine. So, what inferences can you make about his motive in counseling? What do you see as landmines that can lead to leadership failure? How do integrity and character relate to what he's doing? And if you could advise him, what would you say? What might prevent you from saying it? Right? These are really important questions to ask. And what does he need? What's really going on here? So we'll time this for about 10 minutes, have a conversation, and we'll come back. Let's come back together just for a moment. We'll debrief just a couple of minutes, then we have 2 other hypotheticals to get to. So I'm just curious, what did you see? Let's just sort of, I'd just like to get 2 or 3 people. What did you see here? You know, what's going on with this guy? What questions did you have? Let me see what questions I had. What's the first question on there? Thank you. All right, so what inferences can you make about his motives? And let's go to what does he really need? Okay, those are the 2 questions we'll just examine for the moment. So what do you think's going on with this guy? Raise your hand. We need to, right in the back there.
We were saying that looks like he's doing a lot of things out of fear. So like fear-based control.
Okay. So maybe motivation is fear. Okay, what's he afraid of?
Looking bad to other churches, perhaps. Like that's why he has to have control over every detail. Like we didn't really.
Okay, talk a little louder. Yeah.
Yeah, so other churches that he doesn't want to look bad before, or just anybody in general, he doesn't want to look bad.
Okay, so he's trying to make sure that his, quote, sheep are like in line and acting well. Okay, that's very reasonable answer. Anything else? Over here.
It seemed to me, we were talking a little bit about a seeming lack of stability and security, and how there's a lot of stability and security in power and having power over other people. And
good.
in counseling specifically, you get a lot of very sensitive information that you can use to gain power over other people. The blackmail that's talked about here, the threatening, that sort of thing is,
Good.
I think, a really big motive here in the counseling.
Okay, very good. So there's power being exercised here in an invasive, very offensive, invasive way. Yeah, very good. And so there's fear under there, and there's power being exercised. And the choice of, a pastor doesn't have to become a counseling pastor, right? He can be, hey, I don't do any counseling, I don't have any time, but this guy dived in, and he loves counseling, right? So control. He likes having power. All right, good. What does he need? Besides getting smacked.
Yeah, we looked at the motivation being control and power.
Yeah.
The longing being more of the
Talk
longing,
right,
I
talk
mean,
right
being
into the
more
mic
of
if you
validation.
Yeah, talk right in there so I can hear.
The longing being more, the motivation being power control, but the longing being more validation.
Okay, longing to be validated in some way.
Right, he's looking for validation, but we don't have enough data to go underneath that yet.
Right,
The next
right.
level.
What's your name? Yeah. Nolan? Yeah, and so Nolan came up with, this table said, what he needs is a counselor. And then the question is, well, what's the counselor want to know? Counselor wants to go after what is motivating this guy. And Nolan said, maybe it's control, right? And maybe it's fear that he is going to be held responsible. Look at his theology. I'm going to be held responsible for the souls of my church, and therefore I need to know this detailed information. Okay. Now, I would love to tell you that is a hypothetical that I made up in my head. That's all I'm going to say. And I've left out the worst parts. So it's good. It's a good thing to wrestle with. And, I think the question is there help for this guy? Yeah, there's help if he would be honest and be willing to examine what's really going on. Here's part of the problem with understanding your motives. If you start to understand that your motives are not so good, it's not acceptable to us. Like, I don't want to admit that I'm selfish. I don't want to admit that I am a certain way. I don't want to admit that I have longings for something that I don't want to have longings for. So we have to get honest with ourselves about really what's going on. The most powerful prayer you can pray, well, let me put it this way. The most powerful prayer I ever prayed was I still remember, I was going to teach a Bible study on motives of the heart to Edison, New Jersey in the 1970s, late 1970s. And on the way, I said, Lord, would you please reveal to me my motives, the motives of my heart? And he did answer that. And I wanted to throw up for a few weeks. But he did make me pretty exquisitely sensitive to why I do what I do. And it has saved my butt a lot of times. I'll just be honest with you. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Now, we can go to the extreme of that, like, why am I wearing that shirt today and not tomorrow? Or why am I doing that? We can go to extremes, but if you will pray that prayer and ask God, show me the motives of my heart, that's a great prayer. And by the end of tonight, I'll explain why you can pray that prayer without fear of what you'll see. Like I saw stuff in my own heart. Okay. Now, are you ready to go on to the next concept? Next point? Now, I am not going to be spending as much time. Don't worry, I'm not spending as much time on this as we did the first one. I can't. So, secondly, avoid leadership failure by developing an acute sense of impact that you have on others. So it's not enough to be aware of our own motives. We also have to see how we impact other people. And even if, let me ask this question. How many of you have ever experienced having really good motives inside and having a negative impact on other people? How many of you are married? Okay. Happens all the time to me. My motive was good, my impact was terrible. And it happens a lot. And sometimes in counseling, doing marriage counseling, that is a big aha for couples to understand. And not just for couples, it's anybody. Like, yeah, I can have really good motives, but be a nudge. I can be a jerk. I can have negative impact on people. So the key then is I want to start to be aware of my motives and my impact. See, there's a difference between intention and impact. And you may have experienced that when your intention was good, but your impact was bad. So I'll give you an example of this in my own life. When my wife was pregnant with our second child, I was working in a law firm, and it was me and 2 other attorneys, and the senior partner flew off to California for an 8-week trial, and I was left at the office having to support him in this huge trial out in California. So I was literally working from 6 in the morning to 11 at night, routinely, 6 to 7 days a week. And it was really hard. It was really, crunch time. Now, my wife was pregnant, and she needed me to be available to her, both physically and emotionally, and I couldn't. I didn't have a choice. There was no one else to do the work I had to do, and so either let my partner down and, really blow it out there in trial, or be there, all right? So at a certain point during this season, my wife developed a a lot of anger toward me, and basically accused me of abandoning her. Now, think about it. I'm a pretty responsible guy. I'm a jerk in a lot of ways. I'm just going to confess to you. I am a jerk in a lot of ways, but I'm not a guy who would abandon his family or abandon my wife. But you see, that was the impact that I was having. And it was a real attachment wound in our marriage. And it took me a year to be able to get my mind around the idea of abandoning my wife. My motive was to provide for my family and to support my partner. But my impact on my wife was really, really, really bad. And I had to admit that. And, the healing started when I was able to admit what had happened. At least to admit that that's what it felt like to her, was abandonment. That's the impact. So we need to just be able to grasp that, readily, even when it's not our intention. Okay, does that make sense? All right, let's look at this next hypothetical. Tony's going to read to us about John, the CEO.
Here we go. John, age 55, is the CEO of a nonprofit organization with 200 employees and a budget of $30 million. He has 20 years of experience and an incredible track record building successful nonprofit organizations. He is a sought-after speaker at national conferences. He can be charming, has a great sense of humor, and is generally cheerful when things go his way. He has surrounded himself with staff who support and affirm him. He recently bragged to a friend that no one has said no to me in 10 years. In his personal dealings with staff and elders, he can be demanding, abrupt, and demeaning. Programs must be exceptionally well run, and attendance is all important. He believes that numbers are a major indicator of ministry success. He has a personal parking spot closest to his office, the largest office in the complex. He has difficulty delegating tasks to his staff, regularly calls them into unscheduled meetings to check in on their progress, and tends to micromanage even the smallest projects. His leadership style is command and control. People who don't know him adore his charisma and public speaking abilities.
Okay, thank you. So I want you to discuss at your table there, what would it be like to work with John, and how would it make you feel? What do you see as his deepest needs? And what do you see as the essential issues that may lead to his leadership failure? Okay. How do integrity and character relate to his leadership issues? And if you could advise him, what would you say? What does he really need? Okay? So we'll give you another, let's probably do like 8 minutes on this one. Yes, 8 to 10. And see how you do. And I will walk around. If you have questions as we go, we'll do that. Any of you would like to sign up to work at this nonprofit under John? Say it again. We might want to have him as a guest speaker. Might want to have him as a guest speaker. Okay. Okay, so what do you think it would be like to work with John, and how would it make you feel? Let's hear some of your answers here. Not great. Yeah. Nolan.
I feel like it would make me feel like less than, like, oh, if he's treating all these people in his crowd like this, but he's treating me like this, so it must mean I'm less than them, and it would kind of make me feel devalued with him always checking on my work. Like, oh, I guess I can't get anything done, so I don't know.
Like he doesn't trust you.
Yeah.
Right? You can't do it right, so he's going to check on it. Okay, good. What else?
A lot of fear and anxiety. Just like,
okay.
I feel like my perfectionism would be in overdrive, trying to, dot every I, cross every T, make sure I don't miss anything, like standards way above.
Yeah. So maybe that's what he wants. He just wants to pull that from all his employees. We want you to be perfect and perfectionist. Is it working?
No, he was too good. He muted it for me.
Say it. Say it.
What?
No, sorry. Yeah, so fear, anxiety. This guy, does he have any idea of the impact he's having on others?
I don't think he cares.
You don't think he cares? How come?
I think he's got a huge ego, and
Yeah.
he's got a big ego, and, it gets fed by people who don't really know him. And I said to these guys, I was envisioning the iceberg.
Yeah.
He's all about the above the waterline.
Right.
And making that big and showy, and underneath it's a mess.
He's a mess. And so you sort of given up on this guy, like he doesn't care. You think he doesn't care. Okay. So is it hopeless with this guy? It says that he's a sought-after speaker. He can be charming. He's got a great sense of humor. So he's a very charismatic kind of guy. And yet his impact is horrendous on people. What do you think you could do with him? Like, what would be a loving thing to do with a guy like this?
I would try to connect him back with why he got started with their mission in the first place, and see where
I'm sorry.
Try to reconnect him with the mission that whether he founded it or came in, what brought him to this nonprofit, and why has he lost the love for that as opposed to the things he's involved in. You would try to connect with him why he originally is involved with this in the first place. Okay. Good. What else? What else could you do with him? Like you sit down, it would entail talking with him, listening to him, right? Good. Yep.
Drill down on the last sentence of that first paragraph where he's bragging about no one ever says no.
Yeah.
Drill into that, and I think a lot of the answers to a number of these other issues will come out of that.
Okay.
So you keep asking why, to go deeper and deeper into why nobody says no to him.
Yeah, so he's bragging. No one says no to me. All right, well, that indicates power. It indicates control. He does not like to be opposed, right? He does not like to be opposed. And he's proud of that. But what is it doing to him and to his organization?
It's like a cancer.
Exactly. That's exactly the image I had. It's rotting it from the inside out. What would a loving thing be
to do with him?
I think I would give him
Hang
a
on,
reality
hang on.
check.
Go ahead.
I would give him a reality check and let him know, be upfront with him, tell him how he's impacting the organization. And because he's not aware, evidently, because he thinks he's so charismatic and doing the right thing, and he's thinking he's helping people, but he doesn't really know the reality.
Okay. All right, and you were saying be truthful. So reality check, be truthful. Now, that might take a lot of courage. It also takes a lot of love. But is it the loving thing to do? How many people love others enough to reflect impact back to them? How many of us walk around oblivious to our impact? You know, when this is a sad admission, when my son was 2.5 years old, he loved soldiers, and I was giving a speech up at West Point, and I brought him with me. And I remember having this moment with him, and I said, "Do you think Daddy loves you?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you think Daddy likes you?" And he said, "No." Now that broke my heart. But he was saying something to me. He, at 2.5, 3 years old, he was making a distinction between that I needed to pay attention to, because somehow my impact on him was, Daddy doesn't like you very much. And I needed to know what I was doing. Most of us are truth-starved. Most of us are truth-starved because we don't have people who are willing to speak into our life. One of the things that I really want you to get from this is the courage to ask, how do I have impact on you? So if you look, we're just going to skip ahead real quick. Look at look on page 3. Do you see me operating out of any impure motives? How do I impact you? Really important questions. Not for the faint of heart. But if you want to walk in wisdom, you want to surround yourself not with people who will never say no to you. You want to surround yourself with people who will say, "I don't think that's a good idea." Or, "You are being a jerk." Or my wife who said, "Dave, I feel abandoned by you." Right? That's wisdom. So the big point here is to cultivate an awareness of your impact, acute sense of your impact on people, because we're just by nature of our positions, many of us are very blind. How many of us really do want to know the negatives? Doesn't it feel exquisitely painful when you're going to get criticized? I will never forget in law school, everybody was in terror by our torts teacher, who would walk around in his suit, and he was like, you know, the quintessential, stereotypical law professors. "Oh, Mr. Wheatus, well, tell us about this case." "Oh, no one," you know, and everybody's like, "Don't call on me." And I remember him saying, in a moment of a candid moment, he just said, "Don't you understand that I want to someday be able to be in court opposing you, and that you will be a great lawyer against me? That's my motive for what I'm doing here." And judges are not going to be like, "Oh, so tell us about this." This is how they are. And so he was preparing us. And so I remember my attitude sort of changed, and I said, "Look, I just want to be a sponge. I just want to learn. And I want to understand this stuff." So to stop being intimidated by sort of like critique, like, "Okay, you're going to do me a favor by helping me understand how I'm impacting." Okay? All right, we're going to do one more. And again, this will be pretty short. Am I pressing the right button? Here we go. How come it's not advancing? Okay, there you go. Okay. So finally, we've talked about motives of your heart, impact, And third, involves becoming intimately aware of your own weaknesses and developing vulnerability and receptivity to feedback. Very similar to what we've been talking about here. So, a rebuke, Proverbs 17:10, a rebuke goes deeper into a wise man than 100 blows into a fool. Think about that. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says, I most gladly will become a fool in order to become wise. A couple other nice quotes. Leaders who eschew corrective feedback become truth-starved. And feedback is the breakfast of champions. So we come to these questions that I have at the bottom of the page there. One of the most mature and fruitful questions you can ask trusted friends and advisors is, how do I impact you? Do you ever feel used by me? Do you feel manipulated? Am I dictatorial? Right? Someone who will tell you the truth. We used Paul's letter as a jumping point to Timothy. He said, take heed to yourself. How many of us have trusted people in our lives who will speak truth to us? So important. And I would say, if you adopt that, a rebuke goes deeper into a wise man than 100 blows into a fool. Like, okay, rebuke me. Help me. Because I want to learn and I want to grow. But in order to do that, we really have to understand 4 concepts. And I just want to, I don't know that we're going to have time to do this last hypothetical. So let me just make sure I get these 4 things in very quickly. We're going to skip Sarah just for the moment. We need 4 things. The gospel. If you want to be able to do these things, we need the gospel. And what is that? The gospel is that we are forgiven by Christ and we're righteous in Him. And because we are righteous in Him, because He sees us as righteous, we don't have to worry about the weaknesses and the sinfulness. We can be honest with ourselves and Him, and we can be honest with each others. My sins, my dishonesty, my manipulating, my not being motivated by love, in some ways, I'm worse than the Pharisees. What's my hope? My hope is in the cross, the gospel. And so therefore, if I have the gospel and I'm forgiven by Christ, I can draw near to the throne of grace with confidence, it says in Hebrews. I can draw near to Christ, and I don't have to be ashamed. And I can see myself through the grace-filled eyes of Jesus. That's key. And if I can see myself through the grace-filled eyes of Jesus, what can hurt me? Who cares if I'm being criticized? That's fine. Because if the motive is to help me be better at what I'm doing and to be a better person, great. God doesn't condemn me. Why should anybody else? Right? So that's one. We need the gospel. Number 2, we need surgery. It's not enough to be saved and righteous, we are, but we need surgery, meaning we need the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. And so the attitude there is, I want God to do open heart surgery with me. I want Him to come in and change me. Let me just read this passage of Scripture from Ephesians. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and earth is named, that according to the riches of His glory, He may grant you to be strengthened with power through the Spirit in your inner being. Think about that. Strengthened with power by the Spirit, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you being rooted and grounded in love may have the strength to comprehend with all the saints what's the breadth, length, height, and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. He enables us to walk in love because of the sanctifying work of the Spirit. And His motive toward us is good. Nobody goes to a surgeon and says, only get out half the tumor. Nobody does that. Nobody has a quadruple bypass, says, no, just do 2 of them, just the other one, I'm afraid, right? So we can go to our skilled physician, the Father of all, who loves us, who lavishes His love on us, and say, okay, here's the issues in my heart, here's my longings, go for it. And he will do that because he's a good physician. He's loves us and he's good toward us. Okay? Third, abandon deceitfulness and embrace truth. One of the foundational points of change is understanding how we have capacity to be deceitful in our hearts. Paul says, I, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you've been which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness. And then he goes on in verse 15, speaking the truth in love. And 25, putting away lying. Each of you speak truth with his neighbor. We have to love the truth. We have to stop shading, and we have to abandon deception. So how does that start? Lord, I confess to you that I have a deceitful heart. And I actually like to deceive other people and make them think think about me in a way better than I am. And I want to impress. And I want affirmation. And I want to be seen as great. And I want to be, you see, we come before the Lord to be honest with him. We can do that because of the gospel. We do that because of the sanctifying work of the Spirit. And therefore, we can abandon deception and embrace truth. But we have to be willing to admit these things. Does that make sense? So we're called to know the truth, practice the truth, and walk in integrity. Walk in wholeness, not being two-faced. And that requires me to admit my weaknesses before the Lord and to say, Lord, in you, I'm strong, but in me, I'm weak. Please go after the stuff in me that is arrogant or deceptive or selfish or self-promoting, right? That's what it requires. And then finally, it requires community. God did not call you to relationship alone with him and you and Jesus. He calls us into his church, into the body of Christ. And Paul actually says to us, stop lying to one another. You know, I had a couple of hip replacements over the years, and before I had a hip replacement, I was limping terribly because I was in pain. But my hip could not lie to my brain and say, I'm not in pain. My body knew it, right? We're called to walk in community as the body of Christ. And we can't do this alone. We do this in the context of walking with brothers and sisters. And that's where we need to stop lying to each other about what we struggle with, how we struggle, and who we are. If you want to be a leader that walks in integrity, then you've got to be honest. And we've got to be honest with each other and not try to do image management so that you get impressed. We have to be honest with each other and say, look, I'm struggling with this and I'm struggling with that as well. I'm a sinful human being just like anybody else, and I'm struggling with this, but there's grace with Christ. He changes us and we walk with each other. We're members of one another. So I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to open it up for some general questions. I apologize that we didn't have time to get to that third hypo. I'm sure that you can look at that on your own. But Tony, if you just come down with the mic. I'm going to open up for some questions, and I want to just share a couple other things, and we'll wrap up. So who's got a question? Anything that we've covered thus far? Bill.
Yeah, Dave, we didn't get into a ton in depth, but when we touch on impact on others, so kind of this idea of how am I impacting others?
Yeah.
In this day and age, because our own self-esteem comes from like where other people think of us,
yeah.
how do you advise people to stay out of that trap of like people pleasing versus really thinking about how am I impacting other people?
Yeah, I guess I would say I want to understand my motive first. My motive is to impress, right? That's the motive, but why? Because it makes me feel good about myself. If I don't feel good about myself, I feel crappy. I don't feel good. So I need to get into that image management thing, right? So the way out of that trap is God, you go to God with the longing. God, I long to impress, but I don't have to impress because you love me. You are impressed with me in the best sense of the word. You see me through the eyes of Christ, and you see me through the grace-filled eyes of Christ. So, Lord, I long for that. I want to repent of wanting to get that in the wrong way, because nothing matters if I am, in a sense, impressing you, if I'm pleasing you, Lord, and I want to walk in pleasing you. I mean, I try to do that almost every day. Lord, here's what I'm longing for, and I don't want to go in illegitimate ways to get what I'm longing for. I want to get it from you, right? And whether that's excitement, whether that's affirmation, whether it's adoration, whether it's a desire to impress, right? What really matters in life? My relationship with Him and how I love others. That's the bottom line. That's what matters. Anybody else? Does this mean like you know everything and I did a great job, or does it mean like you're confused, or you're just shy, or you're just like really tired, done? All the above. You're tired. Okay. Well, let me do this. Let me invite you to a couple of things. Number one, there's a paper on your table. I would love to be able to keep in touch with you and let you know about our ministry and a lot of activities, as well as we put out a lot of good content. We have a podcast, and Tony graciously had me on his podcast. But I'd love to be able to keep in contact with you. So if you would give us your email, or just fill that out if you'd like to. We will not sell your name to magazine subscriptions or anything like that. But we'd love to stay in contact with you. And there are a couple of things I'd love to invite you to. And I'm going to put up let's see if I can do this. Got to go back, right? Okay, so there's a QR code. We have a lot of events. Let me just tell you a couple of things that you may be interested in. On your table, by the way, there's the Ministry Leader Gathering. It's an invitation. We're going to be doing, what we do is we meet with ministry leaders, whether they're pastors or elders. And if you're interested, you may come to these. The next one we're doing is cultivating relational depth and not navigating conflict in today's ministry context. So on your table, it has dates in different places. I just want to invite you to that. Now, what may be much more pertinent to you, we do a couples seminar called Created for Connection. It's for married couples. It's for other couples, who are either engaged or pre-engaged. And it is a wonderful workshop. Laura does it with me, as well as a couple of other counselors. And it's not your typical marriage workshop. It's not, we're going to tell you all the principles, you're going to learn all the Bible principles, and then you're going to go home and not be able to do them. We teach a little while, and then we guide you through 7 conversations with each other to foster connection. So I would just invite you to that. There's a couple of invites on the table if you're interested in that. And I think that's it in terms of announcements. Laura, is there anything else? I think I got it. Okay, so check out the QR code. And I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for your attention, for being willing to, even though you're tired, just hanging in there with us. And Tony, you want to come up and close this for us? And you got some things to tell us?
Yeah, can we give it up for Dave?
Thank you.